So Dan, we just kind of went through a NBC video of the Karen Reed case. What are your insights, kind of your thoughts about this?
Several. First off, it's I've never had that many supporters at any of my murder trials. So good for her and good for her team. You never see that kind of outpouring for support of a not guilty verdict. You occasionally see it for a guilty verdict, but not a not guilty verdict. So, good for them. Alan Jackson, the lead lawyer, is a really good lawyer, recognized commodity, certainly has great skins on the wall. When the good news about a retrial from a defense perspective is you have seen what the prosecutorial case is. You've seen it in full or almost always largely in full. The bad news is they've seen your cards too and how you play your cards. So it's a little bit of a gain. It's a little bit of a loss. Retrials are tough, particularly where you don't have public support, because oftentimes I think the community sentiment is, you got away with it once, we're not going to let you get away with it this time. So there had to be some pretty compelling evidence, favorable evidence to Karen and her team to capitalize on. But it certainly seemed like the righteous verdict in terms of what I'm familiar with the proof being. So good for them. It's a tragedy all the way around. Ain't no winners in a murder case because you got a dead body, but it seems like the right result.
There was the comments online basically are saying that they were at a party before the incident with the car happened, and since the trial, that house has been sold and the carpet has been changed. Does that, to you, give off red flags, or is that something normal to happen after,
I can't speak to what actually happened, but the incident was something where he was left either hit on the side of the road after leaving a bar. So I'm not sure what the conspiracy theory in changing the carpet in a house is. Basically,
they were at a bar, the husband and the wife. They went to a friend's house to have a party. The friend was a police officer. And then from there, leaving the house, there was the incident with the car. People online are saying that the incident actually happened in the house. Some friends got him and a buddy, or him and the police officer who owned the house, got into a fight, or whatever is the story that they're running with. But since then, that house has been sold and the carpet has been changed. So that's where all this the conspiracy is coming from.
Again, I can't speak to that because I don't really know enough about it. But the last person that you should choose to murder is a law enforcement officer, because the band of blue is a real thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if she was framed or not, as the defense suggests, but you'll get an extra special effort if you murder law enforcement from law enforcement. They'll be there to support their own for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not unusual at all in Texas, if you're charged with capital murder that involves the death of a police officer, for law enforcement officers to just swarm the courthouse. You'll have dozens of them or hundreds of them. They're everywhere, just to make it known that you are not to fuck with a cop.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever represented or been involved in a case where a cop was murdered?
Never defended an accused cop murderer. I have, however, defended dozens of law enforcement officers. So I see them more as clients for me than victims of alleged victims of my clients.
So relating this incident to maybe your personal past, have you ever been a part of a cop killing another cop? Has that ever happened to you?
No, I've had a number of cases where one cop gets in a fight with another cop, or a cop pulls over. My favorite was years ago. I had a police officer who was charged with driving while intoxicated while he was on duty. So he's in uniform behind the wheel, gets pulled over by another cop and gets arrested for DWI. The funniest part about that was it was his second DWI that he'd been arrested for while he was on duty in a marked patrol car wearing a police officer's uniform. He was acquitted, but that's kind of outside the bell curve of your normal DWI.
How challenging is it to convince a jury of law enforcement misconduct?
I think it's easier now, Aaron, than it was historically. I've spoken before, but when I was a kid growing up in beautiful Amarillo, Texas, there was a poster on the wall with this Dick Tracy-looking fella in a blue uniform with the brass buttons and the cop hat and white glove, and it said, "Trust your police officer." I saw that in the first grade. I still have an image of it, at 68. In that generation, in that era, really until I think COVID, as much as anything else, COVID / George Floyd / Trump, I think all those things sort of affected or infected the credibility that law enforcement has. But the hardest thing in the world historically was to effectively cross-examine a police officer, whether it was a Texas Ranger or an FBI or HPD officer, whatever. It was very difficult because they came with great built-in credibility. Now, not so much, which I'm not saying that I don't enjoy because it makes my life easier, but I should step aside and point out the obvious. They have a very difficult job. I mean, if my son said, "Dad, I'm going to join HPD or DPD or whatever," it's, let's talk about that, Hoss. I mean, it is life risking. It is relatively low pay. It is long hours. You are showered with hate and distrust and acrimony. It's a tough gig. I wouldn't want to do it. And the vast majority of law enforcement are great people. I have nothing but mad respect for most law enforcement, but they got some bad eggs like everybody else. But it's a really tough job. But the answer to your question, how hard is it to effectively get a jury to believe that law enforcement officers has sped or sort of, let me say it again. It used to be very difficult to effectively cross-examine a police officer because they came with so much inherent credibility. I think a lot of that has been gone, and I think the dissipation of that is a function of COVID, which we can articulate the whys or the whats or the wherefores, but George Floyd, I think, was a seminal moment in law enforcement distrust. I think January 5th / Trump was a big moment. So all those things make it harder for police officers to have the built-in credibility they used to have.
So the jurors cited sloppy investigation and too many holes in the prosecution's case. From a defense's perspective, what are critical weaknesses that you generally find in evidence that make a case come off as sloppy or investigation sloppy?
Well, 2 or 3 things. The first is tunnel vision, where law enforcement comes to a conclusion about what happened early on, and they investigate only one person, or they don't investigate obvious clues. So when there's tunnel vision involved, and there's not, it's not evidence-based direction, it's just focus based upon their belief or supposition that a given individual committed it, that's a problem. The second thing, primarily in this order, I think, the first thing is tunnel vision. The second thing is chain of custody, where they don't maintain the integrity of the scene or they don't maintain a proper chain of custody evidence. That's a problem. And the third thing is kind of ubiquitous to any industry, but under insufficient training, insufficient education, and sloppy work. So all those things come into play when you're trying law enforcement, as opposed to some other dude did it defense or self-defense, or it wasn't me, or what have you.
So some of John O'Keefe's family and supporters, they called the verdict a miscarriage of justice. How do you balance compassion for the victim's family with the duty to defend, your client?
In just about every murder case I've ever tried, I've had great compassion for the family. I mean, it's very few people deserve killing. Some do, but it's rare. So I've always had great compassion for the victim's family or the deceased family or whatever. But that doesn't make it any harder to do my job. My job is unaffected by my empathy or compassion for the complainant's family. I don't want to say I don't want to give a shit about it, but it doesn't impact my ability to go forward and aggressively represent my client. I do get attacked by families of the victims or families of the complainants. They hate me. They hate defense lawyers. They think we're sleazy. They think we'll do anything and everything for money. I get all that. I understand their vitriol. I understand their acrimony, because in addition to losing a loved one, they got some asshole up there who's defending the person that they think killed their loved one. So I get it. It's a natural transference of hate or angst. So I'm not even offended by it. I get it. I understand it. I would probably feel the same way if I wasn't in this business. I will go sideways. There's a good friend of mine named Chris Tritico. He's a very good criminal defense lawyer in Houston. I have known Chris for 42 years. He and I worked for the same mentor. He was a few years behind me. Chris is a lovely guy, Chris and Debbie. They had a daughter, and she was 22, 23 years old, and she was murdered in West Palm Beach. Her husband was playing frisbee golf or whatever, and some gangbanger was down on the beach and was shooting at another gangbanger, and the bullet traveled, just this magic bullet traveled through a couple of buildings, went through one bench and killed Maria, shot her dead in the head. Completely random, horrible thing. But the point of that is the alleged killer was not getting effective representation. He had shitty lawyers who weren't visiting with him, weren't doing what they should have been doing, and the case got delayed and delayed and delayed. And Chris Tritico traveled to the court where this individual was on trial and asked the judge to appoint competent counsel. I get it. My daughter was murdered, but everybody is entitled to, adequate, fair, and decent representation. And the guy who killed my daughter is not getting that adequate, fair, and decent representation. I ask you to appoint somebody that does. I mean, it's fucking remarkable. I mean, that's a gold medal winner of class, dignity, and professionalism. I don't think I could do it.
Wow. So the case, it drew massive, public attention. Free Karen Reed was everywhere. How does such a high-profile environment impact the defense attorney's strategy, like both inside and outside the courtroom?
Well, it's case specific, obviously, but this is the unicorn to have this kind of support for someone accused of murder. It just doesn't happen. That's a unicorn. The more traditional, common, overwhelmingly common instance is where everybody thinks your client is guilty. So there's the first and most obvious problem that presents is getting a fair jury that's untainted by the sentiment or the presumption that your client's guilty. You can get a change of venue, but in a high-profile case, and I've had dozens of them, you can change the venue all you want, but in this day and time, the media is still going to be there. So getting a fair trial